Hey guys, welcome back to Hashtag Simplicity. This is season 4. I'm really looking forward to this. But before I start everything, I have to say thank you to the listeners that have been with me since day one. Thank you for tuning in and always trusting and believing in me. Thank you for always participating because I wouldn't have the courage to keep on moving forward if you guys were not here to listen to me. Thank you so much for that. And for season 4, I want to do something so special. To this platform that I have, that you guys have allowed me to express myself and express my tips, my ideas, and just the conversations that I've been bringing here and the interviews that I've been having here. I want to show my African heritage. I want to talk about it. I want to show the world what Africa is going through. This is not a political podcast. However, I want to take the opportunity that I have to speak about what's going on around the world, what's going on in Africa, what's going on in my country, the Congo. As you guys know already, I'm your host, Rufin. And if you haven't read the title yet, today we're going to be talking about the state of human rights in Africa. If you haven't yet, go listen to the podcast interview that I just did with Mr. Samba. It'll be so helpful and help you understand also certain things I will be talking about throughout this season. And today we'll discuss the major challenges faced by various countries in Africa, from political oppression to economic disparities, and highlight inspiring stories of resilience and progress. So, like in every other episode that we've done before, find a cozy spot, find a place. Join me as we embark on this insightful journey together. First thing I want to do is understanding human rights in the African context. Human rights are fundamental principles that safeguard the dignity, the freedom, and the well-being of everybody. And these rights are universal. They transcend cultures, borders, and governments. Yet, the implementation and protection of human rights vary significantly across regions and nations. In Africa, as we want to talk about, a continent that is rich in diversity and history, the state of human rights presents a complex tapestry of challenges and triumphs. And to understand the current state of human rights in Africa, we must first consider the historical context. Africa's colonial past has left deep scars that continue to influence its political, its economic, and social landscapes. Colonial rule was marked by exploitation, racial discrimination, and the suppression of indigenous cultures and governance systems. The struggles for independence in the mid-20th century, around the 1960s, brought hope and the promise of self-determination, but it also set the challenge for new generations to come. And I want to talk about those challenges. Number one, something that I've seen and think should be number one problem is the political oppression and authoritarianism. Because it's still a significant barrier to human rights in many African countries today. Authoritarian, those regimes often suppress dissent, restrict freedom of speech, and limit political participation. For instance, in countries like Eritrea, Sudan, Congo, citizens face severe restrictions on their freedom of expression and assembly. And political opponents, journalists, and activists are frequently subjected to arbitrary arrest, torture, and even extrajudicial killings. One notable example is Zimbabwe. All right, let's talk about that for a second. Zimbabwe, where the legacy of Robert Mugabe's authoritarian rule continues to impact the nation's political climate. And despite the transition to a new president, reports of human rights abuses, including crackdowns on protests and opposition, continue still. This environment stifles democratic development and perpetuates a cycle of fear and repression. The number two problem, I think it is economic disparities and poverty, because those are pervasive issues that exacerbate human rights violation in Africa. Despite the continent's vast natural resources, many African countries struggle with high levels of poverty and inequality. And according to the World Bank, I checked, Sub-Saharan, if I said it correctly, Sub-Saharan Africa is one of the regions with the highest rates of extreme poverty in the world. Poverty limits access to basic human rights such as education, healthcare, and adequate housing. In countries like Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, as you want to call it, vast wealth gaps and corruptions hinder economic development and the equitable distribution of resources. The exploitation of natural resources often benefit a small elite while leaving the majority in poverty, fueling social unrest and conflict. The third problem, I think it is the armed conflicts and instability. Why do I say that? I think that those two things pose severe threats to human rights across Africa. Regions like the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Great Lakes have experienced prolonged conflicts that result in widespread human rights abuses. Civilians are often caught in the crossfire, facing displacement, violence, and loss of livelihoods. And not just in those places, also on the east side of Congo, in Goma. In Somalia also, decades of civil war have led to a breakdown of governance and the rule of law, making it one of the most challenging environments for human rights protection. And like I said, in the Congo and the Goma area, there's also the same violence. Similarly, in South Sudan, the ongoing conflict has resulted in mass atrocities, including ethnic cleansing, sexual violence, and the recruitment of child soldiers. Imagine that. These conflicts create humanitarian crises and undermine efforts to build stable, rights-respecting societies. Number 4 challenge is gender-based violence and discrimination. Gender-based violence and discrimination are pervasive issues also. Those are issues that disproportionately affect women and girls in Africa. Despite progress in some areas, traditional practices, cultural norms, and systematic inequalities continue still. In countries like Nigeria, for example, the prevalence of practices such as female genital mutilation, also known as FGM, and child marriage violates the rights of women and girls. Sexual violence is also a significant concern, particularly in conflict zones. For example, in the DRC, sexual violence has been used as a weapon of war, causing immense physical and psychological trauma to survivors. Efforts to combat gender-based violence face numerous obstacles, including inadequate legal framework, weak enforcement mechanisms, and societal stigmatizations of survivors. Nonetheless, Grassroots movements and women's rights organizations are at the forefront of advocating for change and empowering women to assert their rights. And lastly, the challenge that I think is also important that people should look at and consider is health and environmental challenges. Those two significantly impact human rights in Africa. The continent faces a high burden of disease such as HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. And there are many more that I may have not mentioned. And those issues strain healthcare systems and limit access to essential services. Additionally, environmental degradation, driven by factors like deforestation, climate change, and industrial pollution, exacerbates vulnerability and threatens livelihoods. For instance, the impact of climate change on agricultural productivity has led to food insecurity in regions like the Sahel. Drought and desertification displaced communities. It increased competition for resources and contribute to conflict over land and water. These environmental challenges underscore the interconnectedness of human rights. Not just that, but also health and environmental sustainability. And among all these challenges, there are inspiring stories of resilience and progress that highlight the potential for positive change in Africa. We can talk about negativity, but there are also some positive things that I would like to bring on the table. Grassroots movements, civil society organizations, and people are driving efforts to promote and protect human rights across the continent. Civil society organizations play a crucial role in advocating for human rights and holding governments accountable. In countries like Kenya and South Africa, vibrant civil society movements have been instrumental in advancing democratic governance, transparency, and social justice. One notable example is the work of the African Commission of Human and People's Rights, which monitors and addresses human rights violations across the continent. It's also known as the ACHPR, which provides a platform for people and organizations to raise awareness about human rights abuses and seek redress. Several countries in Africa have made significant strides in strengthening their legal and institutional frameworks to protect human rights. For instance, South Africa's post-apartheid constitution is lauded for its robust protection of civil liberties and social justice. The country's constitutional court has played a pivotal role in upholding these rights and setting important legal precedents. Similarly, in other countries like the west side of Africa, we have Senegal that's also doing a good job. We have Burkina Faso that's also doing a good job. We have many other countries. We just gotta keep moving on the legal field, obviously. Another thing that I want to talk about is grassroots activism and social movements. Those are powerful forces for change in Africa. Movements like End SARS in Nigeria, Fees Must Fall in South Africa, Goma. All those hashtags on social media, mobilizing the population, mobilizing people. Those things have mobilized millions of people to demand accountability, justice, and social reforms. Like, for example, the movement that the DRC players have done during the semifinal of the AFCON, the African Nation Cup. That has mobilized a lot of media, even though many people didn't want to show it on their platforms. It has brought eyes on the situation in Goma, in the Congo. Also, the End SARS movement, which began as a protest against It was against, I believe, police brutality, and involved into a broader call for government accountability and human rights. The movement's success in drawing international attention to Nigeria's human rights issues exemplifies the power of collective action. Another key thing I want to talk about is Africa's youth, because we are a driving force for change, leveraging technology and innovation to address human rights challenges. Young activists, entrepreneurs, and tech-savvy individuals are using digital platforms to raise awareness, and we should be using that also to advocate for justice and create solutions to social problems. For example, in Uganda, youth-led initiatives like the policy organization, they use data and technology to promote transparency and civic engagement. By empowering young people to participate in governance and social change, this initiative contributes to building a more inclusive and rights-respecting society. And another thing, regional and international cooperation is vital for addressing human rights challenges in Africa. Organizations like the African Union, or AU, and the UN, they work with African governments to promote human rights, peace, and development. Even though they should be doing more jobs than what we see. We still gotta give them props, because the little that they put, we should take care of that and make big thing out of it. The AU's Africa Charter on Human and People's Rights set a framework for member states to uphold human rights standards. And also the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs, they provide a global blueprint for addressing poverty, inequality, and injustice. But the problem again in all this thing, though we may have resources, the problem is political oppression. The government, the people on top, they are greedy. And as we close this exploration of the state of human rights in Africa, it's clear that the continent faces significant challenges, but also holds immense potential for progress. Addressing political oppression, economic disparities, armed conflicts, gender-based violence, and health and environmental challenges require concerted efforts from governments, civil society, and the international community. And you guys, you the listeners, this generation of Africans, by promoting and protecting human rights, we can build society that uphold the dignity, freedom, and well-being for everybody. The stories of resilience and progress we have highlighted remind us that positive change is possible, even in the face of adversity. And as Maya Angelou said, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Thank you for joining me on this journey of exploring the state of human rights in Africa. Let's continue to advocate for justice, equality, and human dignity, and support to those who are working tirelessly to create a brighter future for all. Remember, as we navigate life's complexity, empathy and insights are our greatest allies in building a more just and compassionate world. Until next time, bye-bye.